What does it take to turn a lesser kaiju into an all-time great? After 8 films in the Showa era, Gamera was seemingly dead alongside his home of Daiei Film, bleeding cash and ending with one of the worst kaiju movies ever made. But in 1995, a coalition of Japanese production companies gave director Shusuke Kaneko and screenwriter Kazunori Ito the chance to bring the giant friend to all children back in a new, far more intense interpretation that stood apart from decades of Gojira copies. And with Gojira dormant in Japan and about to have a disastrous American interpretation, the time was right for Gamera to find the success that had always eluded his original movies. Gamera has only really evolved across 2 distinct periods, Showa and Heisei, with large gaps between them due to the collapse of his home studio. But it was the Heisei era that gave the turtle kaiju his greatest films, and some of the greatest in the entire history of the genre, only lasting from 1995 through 2006 and encompassing 4 Gamera films. This is the moment when a ridiculed franchise suddenly became the embodiment of what makes kaiju films special, despite its short time in the spotlight. Here we'll explore the entirety of Heisei Gamera, from the relaunch that took an atomic age monster into uncertain modern times, to the final theatrical film that homaged Showa-era hallmarks with a charming update. And with films that tested the limits of what kaiju stories could do, we'll see how Gamera became the dark king of the kaiju in the 90s. The story of Gamera is intertwined with the rise and fall of his home studio, Daiei Film, and it was Daiei's struggling finances that directly impacted the quality of Showa Gamera films, drawing up budgets and eventually bringing the series to a close when the studio declared bankruptcy, with the last hurrah of Gamera Super Monster in 1980 being a glorified and embarrassing clip show. However, by the early 90s, Daiei had begun somewhat regularly making films again, with limited budgets and a distribution deal with Toho Studios, relying on their one-time rival to get their films out into theaters. With films back on the table, Daiei decided to return to tokusatsu movies, and their choice to bring them back to past glory was Daimajin, the giant warrior god who had gotten his own trilogy in the 60s. But Daiei's research soon showed that the Japanese public was way more interested in the return of Gamera, with the studio getting to work on a new film in time for the 30th anniversary of Gamera the Giant Monster from 1965. In the time since Gamera had last appeared on the big screen, the state of kaiju films had massively changed. Godzilla had returned in 1984, re-establishing the king of the monsters in the Heisei era of Japan, and resulting in 6 more films, with Toho bringing this goji to a close at the end of '95 to make way for the US deal with TriStar Pictures. Meanwhile, Gamera had gained a different type of attention in the United States, with Mystery Science Theater 3000 skewering many of the Showa films in the late 80s and early 90s, drawing international attention to many of Daiei's worst mistakes. And in 1991, Gamera co-creators Noriyuki Iwasa and Niisan Takahashi made the short Gamera vs. Gerasharp for the Gamera Permanent Preservation Plan Laserdisc set. It's really weird. But despite Gamera's shaky reputation, Daiei saw the Giant Turtles' rebirth as the chance to succeed in ways they never had before, bringing in some much-needed money for the studio. And to bring Gamera back, Daiei hired screenwriter Niisan Takahashi, who had written every Showa-era film. However, the studio soon rejected Takahashi's script and hired Shusuke Kaneko to direct their upcoming movie. At this point, Kaneko was best known for romantic comedies, and also some softcore porn, but mostly romantic comedies. His most distinguishing work that helped display his potential for a Gamera movie was his segment in the horror anthology Necronomicon, with a screenplay by Kazunori Ito. Ito, best known for writing Ghost in the Shell and Patlabor, and Kaneko clearly got along well, as Ito was quickly hired to write the upcoming Gamera reboot. Alongside them was Shinji Higuchi, here in the role of special effects director for the first time after years working in support roles, and also simultaneously playing a major part in the creation of Neon Genesis Evangelion. Kaneko, Ito, and Higuchi, as well as music composer Kao Otani, would all remain in their roles across the Gamera trilogy they would soon create. and their contributions are what would make these films incredible both individually and as a whole. However, the creative team quickly butted heads with Daiei producers over how Gamera should be portrayed. The Showa era of the kaiju had largely been defined by the film and its star creature's kid-friendly nature, with Gamera earning the title Friend to All Children thanks to his film's focus on how Gamera would be connected to and protect some dumb little kid in each adventure. Kaneko had dreamed of making a Gamera movie for years, and jumped at the chance when offered the director's chair. But Daiei was insistent that the kaiju would return in a children's film, which simply didn't fit Ito's script or the visual representations created by Kaneko and Higuchi. This resulted in Ito's script being rewritten 6 times, toning down the violence of the story while also pushing Higuchi to create a friendlier giant turtle, with the one that appeared on screen much more family-friendly than what they originally had in mind. The first Heisei Gamera was cute because Daiei Studios ordered it to be like that, said Higuchi. Their target audience was children, but we thought monsters should be scary, so we gradually increased our influence over the 3 films. The end product of these creators and Daiei's demands was released in Japan in 1995 as Gamera, Giant Monster Mid-Air Battle, and in the US in 1997 as Gamera, Guardian of the Universe. Made for around $4.5 million, roughly about half of the budget of contemporary Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, Guardian of the Universe is a fairly straightforward kaiju film, with our Japanese protagonists first discovering the arrival of Gyaus, here a flock of ancient superbirds, before witnessing the arrival of Gamera, created in ancient Atlantis to protect the world from Gyaus. With elements like Gyaus, Atlantis, Gamera's heroic nature, and the kaiju's mental bond to a young character, Guardian is identifiably Gamera in all its core elements, but done in a much more modern, less whimsical way. Here, teenager Asagi, played by Ayako Fujitani, forms a psychic bond with Gamera, updating the Showa era's tendency to have a kid become linked with the kaiju, only this time providing more of an explanation, as we learn that both Gyaus and Gamera were created by an ancient Atlantean civilization, with Gyaus an experiment gone wrong, and Gamera as the world's last hope in the event that Gyaus returns. Guardian of the Universe is the most traditional of Kaneko's trilogy, sticking to the classic kaiju beats of a few key human characters becoming involved in the mystery surrounding giant monsters suddenly appearing, Japanese military forces attempting to stop the creatures to little effect, and our heroic kaiju reflecting the struggles of the humans. And while it's the lightest of the 3, there's way more peril and violence than the early films, even though those loved some blood and guts. And like what was briefly established in vs. Jiger, the military sees Gamera as a threat and attacks him instead of Gyaus, proving Gamera to be much more vulnerable than Heisei Gojira. There's a fascinating dichotomy within this relaunch that only grows with each film, as Daiei's demands for child-friendly entertainment and Kaneko, Ito, and Higuchi's desire to create a more mature and scary kaiju film result in a movie that is brighter, friendlier, and more hopeful while still involving some brutal moments. The Gyaos in particular are way more terrifying than the original incarnation, keeping the iconic Showa design but making it a meaty, bloody thing that eats a lot of people. Our co-lead scientist Mayumi Nagamine, played by Shinobu Nakayama, even finds her professor's glasses in a giant pile of poop. They turn this guy into poop. That's one of my top 3 fears. In turn, Gamera himself becomes more morally gray while still being truly heroic, sacrificing his own well-being to save people, but also not playing by humanity's moral guidelines. That tension would only grow in the coming movies. Gamera is a creature that I really feel sorry for, said Kaneko. Its intentions aren't bad, but its size doesn't help. While it defeats evil monsters, it inconveniences humankind by destroying cities and so on. Much like the Showa Gamera movies often featured some degree of positive social or ecological message, Guardian ties the return of Gyaos to modern Japan's pollution, awakening the beasts as a means of extreme environmental control. This in turn makes Gamera's protection of humanity and his spiritual link with Asagi, who shares Gamera's wounds while also making him more human, more morally murky. The symbiotic bond is the centerpiece of Guardian's climax, with Gamera and the now giant Hypergyaus facing off in what is essentially a Wild West shootout. I really love it. It's a very original way to end your film's action, and the pyro here is spectacular for the budget. Really, the entire film looks fantastic. Guardian of the Universe ends with the promise that Gamera will return if the world needs him. And with a box office of 520 million yen, Daiei quickly asked the team to return for a sequel. Gamera 2: Attack of Legion was released just a little over a year later in 1996, once again made by Kaneko, Ito, Higuchi, and Otani, with the creative team asserting more control over the tone and focus of the film thanks to the proven success of the first. And Attack of Legion incorporates more horror into its kaiju disaster. Here, it's the sudden arrival of an alien bug colony named Legion that threatens Japan and the world as a whole. With both human-sized bugs and a gigantic Mother Legion kaiju, the sequel incorporates its human characters more into the fight and shares quite a bit in common with vs. Destoroyah's dual-sized monster threats. And like the final Heisei Gojira film, Legion isn't afraid to make darker, more dangerous decisions with its star monster. Even in its moments of triumph, Attack of Legion is terrifying. In particular, Gamera's fight to stop the launch of a Legion seed still destroys most of Sendai in a nuclear-like explosion that feels so much more visceral than where most kaiju films would be willing to go. Legion essentially acts as an invading foreign army to Japan, targeting the country's biggest cities and even devouring its technology for fuel. Kaneko highlights how ill-prepared the country's self-defense forces are against an invading threat, with only Gamera and the people's faith in him able to stop what is essentially an endlessly colonizing force. Attack of Legion also incorporates Christian iconography, with the symbol of the cross highlighted in its opening titles, the alien insects named Legion by a soldier after the gospel stories detailing a man possessed by many demons. Gamera himself is placed in a Christ-like position, seemingly dead for days until rising from the grave thanks to Asagi's symbiotic intervention. The collision between the Christian metaphors and a deeply Japanese story make Attack of Legion operate on more levels than Guardian, with the film at times extremely creepy and darker than what came before. Even Gamera himself is shocked and scared at points, with Legion being an overwhelming threat that the kaiju and military must team up against to survive. The film also adds a new power to Gamera, with the hero absorbing a massive amount of mana and then unleashing an ultimate plasma attack from his chest. Gamera 3 would explain it more, but I think this works really well as a somewhat unexplainable climax, with Gamera fully embracing his role as a supernatural savior. The visual effects overall in the trilogy would vary in quality when it comes to CGI, but I generally think its use in any fireball and beam attacks work really well, adding a layer of spectacle to the high-quality suit and set production. Gamera 2 was a somewhat bigger hit than the first, with a box office of 700 million yen. Leading to one more under Daiei's still limited production budget. Given everything that has been lost and sacrificed in the film, Attack of Legion ends with our heroes questioning whether Gamera protects humanity or the world. And if humanity itself was deemed as a threat to the planet, would Gamera attack it as his enemy? Kaneko's final film puts its kaiju and humans into their most morally questionable struggle yet. Released in 1999, Gamera 3: Awakening of the Evil God, or Revenge of Iris in the US, is Kaneko, Ito, Higuchi, and Otani's final word on the giant turtle, with a film that's as personal as it is apocalyptic. And with the creators finally given the free reign they'd wanted from the start, Gamera 3 takes unconventional, strange, and ultimately totally successful swings with its kaiju story. Here, it's the year 1999, with flocks of Hypergyaus now wreaking havoc around the world, and Gamera resorting to more devastating tactics than ever, creating mass destruction in an effort to stop these nightmarish creatures from ending the world. At the same time, the traumatized Ayana Hirasaki, played by Ai Maeda, is haunted by the death of her parents in the original battle between Gamera and Gyaos. And when Ayana discovers the egg of a strange new kaiju prophesied to be the ultimate enemy of Gamera, she bonds with it to enact her revenge on the creature she blames for every loss in her life. And the result is a climactic film that poses so many morally ambiguous questions and refuses to provide any easy answers. The tension between heroism and destruction in Gamera present since the first film is fully brought to the forefront here, while Kaneko simultaneously pushes the kaiju to the background, and instead focuses on his lead characters. Here, the vengeance of Ayana is balanced by the return of Asagi and Mayumi, who find that Gamera has become less understandable and more destructive without a human connection. Really, Gamera is only the focus of two extended scenes. First is his battle against Hypergyaus in Tokyo's Shibuya district, where Gamera's no-holds-barred fight to stop his enemy explodes dozens of blocks and buildings, causing 20,000 deaths or injuries. violence. It's extremely rare to have a heroic kaiju cause so much carnage, even in modern films, with most films making it clear that cities have been evacuated before the buildings topple. Here, Kaneko complicates matters even further by having Gamera specifically go out of his way to shield a young boy from a Gyaus attack, only to juxtapose this one life saved with a city on fire. The second is the fight between Gamera and Iris, and while the CGI is somewhat undercooked in some scenes, it's shot with an immediacy and sense of danger that feels like Kyoto is about to explode. The lack of easy answers extends to Iris itself, with the villainous kaiju never fully explained, only hinted at through legends and DNA. Iris could be a demon prophesied to end the world, or it could be a guardian akin to Gamera and essentially his opposite. Or it could have been created by the Atlanteans as a countermeasure to Gamera if he ever went out of control. Or it could be an evolved form of Gyaus that has come to pave the way for the swarm. Even Iris's evil nature is in question, with the line between Ayana's hatred and Iris's evil intent blurred, until it's revealed that Iris killed her family near the end. What's really important is that Gamera's embodiment of goodwill and Iris's wicked intent are juxtaposed, realigning humanity's perception of Gamera on the eve of an apocalypse, so that he can once again become a savior instead of a shepherd of doom. Revenge of Iris doesn't have the best fights of the franchise or even the trilogy. That honor goes to Attack of Legion. But instead of elaborate choreography and wild moves, Kaneko and Higuchi shoot their kaiju battles in much closer detail, often employing close angles and shaky cam to portray the immediacy and power of Gamera, Gyaus, and Iris. The film's final battle is all done in close quarters, with the two enemies trapped in Kyoto's train station alongside all the humans connected to them. It's not extravagant, but it's visceral and powerful, and I love it. So much of Gamera 3 interrogates our relationships with kaiju and our tendency to write our own emotions and meanings onto massive, unknowable, inhuman creatures that have no real relation to us. Plenty of kaiju films, and especially the Showa Gamera movies, explicitly gave their kaiju human emotions and motivations, with the original giant turtle a total white hat babyface hero. With each successive film in the trilogy, Kaneko pulls back the humanity more and more from his titular monster, until he's unable to be fully understood by human terms. He's essentially transitioned from being 80s Hulk Hogan to being 2010's Undertaker. But that's what makes Revenge of Iris's climax even more powerful. I think kaiju films have three distinct phases of appeal that each work depending on the life stage and outlook of the fan. There's the playful fantasy aspect, with kids pretending to be their favorite monster and stomping around in their backyard. Then there's the disaster metaphor, helping an older generation cope with catastrophes out of their control. And finally, there's the spiritual empowerment, where a fan of any age can see their favorite kaiju as a large-scale embodiment of who they want to be. Gamera 3 questions if any of those interpretations can be true, and forces us to settle on our own new meaning. With Ayana about to be absorbed by Iris in its final battle with Gamera, the kaiju rescues her by ripping her out of the villain's body, making him vulnerable, and losing a hand in the process, while still destroying Iris with a totally awesome banishing fist made of plasma. Through all the wild destruction, focus on hatred, and seeming hopelessness in the face of evil, Kaneko and Ito refocus on the importance of love and acceptance, as Gamera saves Ayana and reestablishes his connection to humanity, who in turn stand by his side for a final battle against an endless horde of Hypergyaus. Revenge of Iris ends just as ambiguously as it begins, not showing what comes next, but declaring Gamera to be the absolute guardian of the universe, on the edge of a new millennium. Will he survive? It's ultimately up to the viewer's faith in Gamera. Revenge of Iris was a big hit, grossing $15 million upon release despite having basically non-existent international distribution. But the time had come for the trilogy's creators to move on. After completing his trilogy, Kaneko would go on to make Godzilla Mothra King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All-Out Attack for Toho's Millennium Era, creating a Godzilla that was empowered by the souls of the countless dead caused by Japan in World War II. It's an inverse that highlights Kaneko's approach to kaiju, and what he set out to say with Gamera, with Godzilla as an incarnation of evil, and Gamera the incarnation of goodwill. opposites of one another in stories that center on humanity's relationship to kaiju as embodiments of their best and worst impulses, essentially becoming walking metaphors for both the natural world and its impact on humankind, and humankind's destructive impulses that reshape the world around them. There's a push and pull at the core of Kaneko's approach to kaiju that keeps it from being easily defined. Reflecting on what kaiju symbolize, Kaneko would later say, "Monster movies are embodiments of man's natural impulse to destroy something. When calamities caused by monsters are portrayed, I think they're often associated with natural disasters." For Higuchi, this also came about in a cultural memory tied to both the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the many natural disasters that have devastated the country over the centuries. Not even the most advanced civilization in Japan is guaranteed to last forever, with Higuchi saying, "We somehow sense that our city could turn to dust. It could vanish. I guess we have that image hidden deep inside us." For Kaneko, kaiju are rooted in Japan's constant cycle of natural disasters like typhoons, one of which arrives at the climax of Iris, and the disastrous history of Japan's military in World War II, which is why the military, and specifically Japan's self-defense force, are featured so heavily but are ultimately ineffective against the natural disaster embodied with Gamera or Gojira. Japanese audiences expect to see the SDF lose against kaiju because they associate it with their perceptions of the Japanese military that lost the war. In the end, kaiju are either the exterior forces that Japan has lost against before, or the cultural strength of the nation, finally rising to save the day after years of losses. After GMK, Kaneko would never make another kaiju film, saying that he felt stuck in a rut with the formula of monster movies by the end of his 4 films. Gamera, however, was not quite done on the big screen. In 2002, Kadokawa Shoten Studios acquired Daiei, and with it came a new reboot of Gamera, written by Yukari Tatsui and directed by Ryuta Tasaki, largely known for TV shows like Super Sentai and lots of Kamen Rider movies. The film would be Gamera the Brave, released in 2006. And while the film opens with a darker Gamera and the battle against a flock of Gyaus that evokes Kaneko's trilogy, the vast majority of The Brave feels like an homage to the Showa films. It's essentially a boy and his dog story, with young Toru, coping with the sudden death of his mother, finding a Gamera egg left by the last Gamera, who sacrificed himself to stop Gyaus. Of course, there's also an evil monster named Zetas, but the majority of the film is focused on Toru's character growth and Gamera's literal growth. With Toru naming his pet turtle Toto, there's a much more kid-friendly approach here. And like those original films, the bond between young boy and kaiju is most important, with a sillier, lighter tone. Toru is, just like so many of those Showa kids, a dumb little jabroni who just can't get it together. Like, seriously Toru, stop monologuing and just give Gamera his special rock. He needs that shit to live, man. And with Gamera slowly gaining his powers one by one, The Brave has a much smaller scale where things like a fireball and flight are big moments instead of just part of the larger kaiju spectacle. One of the best moments is the relay race between the kids, running to bring the magical stone to Gamera to help him defeat Zetas. With no words spoken, but an innate understanding, it's a moment of magical realism that harkens back to how Kid Logic defined the Showa-era movies, and worked to undermine the limited views of the adults present. Overall, Gamera the Brave is a fun throwback to the original films, and an appropriate way to bring the franchise full circle after Kaneko and Ito pushed the kaiju to his most extreme and mature possibilities. But with a box office of 410 million yen, the film became the lowest grossing of the Heisei era, and a fraction of the 2.4 billion yen that Godzilla Final Wars had made 2 years earlier. With Kadokawa taking a gamble on a Daiei property, and kaiju films in a strange, dead period in their history, there was no reason for another Gamera movie. One of the most interesting characteristics of Gamera in the Heisei era is how distinctly and purposefully the kaiju's look evolves across each of these 4 films. Guardian's design is the most similar to the friendly later Showa versions, including a rounder body, bigger eyes, and more human-like features. Overall, he's also a lot better designed to be mobile and battle-ready than the super stiff turtle on his back look of the original films. Gamera would become fiercer and fiercer looking afterward, becoming covered in spikes and essentially weaponized at all times, as if each film's decisions permanently altered his body. These changes were the result of Higuchi and Kaneko finally being able to create the vision they initially had when success brought them freedom under Daiei, with Higuchi highlighting the increasingly small size of Gamera's head in comparison to a more and more bulky body, saying, "This represents a transition in the creature's emotions and characteristics." Likewise, Gamera's attacks like the plasma fireball and spinning shell cutter grow deadlier, creating devastation in their wake. This evolution makes it clear that Gamera has been permanently changed by the war to save the world, and there is no going back. Unless of course you just reset the entire franchise. The Gamera scene in The Brave, named Avant Gamera, is much more dangerous looking and evokes the spiked, destructive appearance of the trilogy until giving rise to Toto, who's, well, cute. Even after growing to almost full size, I just kinda wanna give him a little pat on the head. It's not really a look I love, but it works for the story here. Across these films, Gamera would be brought to life by multiple suit actors: Takatero Manabe and Jun Suzuki in GOTU, Akira Ohashi in G2, Hirofumi Fukazawa in G3, and Toshinori Sasaki in GTB. No single person can lay claim to being the defining voice behind Gamera, but the combined visions, portrayals, and creations of everyone involved make Heisei Gamera into the most nuanced and thrilling kaiju in history. Following Gamera the Brave, the giant turtle would go dormant for a decade, until the debut of a 4-minute short film by Katsuhito Ishii screened at Comic-Con and on Twitch to celebrate Gamera's 50th anniversary in 2015. And it's like, totally fine. With only a few minutes of story, the short essentially cribs both the feel of Revenge of Iris and the plot from the start of Brave. Not much would come from the renewed interest in Gamera, as Daiei had officially become extinct after its acquisition and transformation into Kadokawa Daiei Motion Picture Company, which was then renamed Kadokawa Pictures. Daiei was officially gone, and time, money, and waning interest had done what no other monster was able to for decades: kill Gamera. And as I do with all my retrospectives, it's time for a ranking of every Heisei Gamera movie. Because they're short and not really comparable, Gamera vs. Gara Sharp and the 2015 short will not be included here. At 4, Gamera the Brave. A very sweet boy and his dog type story that's in the style of Showa Gamera, especially with its focus on children and having Gamera slowly grow and strengthen alongside our main character. The climactic child relay race really drives home the film's magical realist point of view. It's really big whiplash coming off Kaneko's dark and apocalyptic trilogy, but it feels like a loving modern update of what made the Showa era special. As the final Gamera film, it brings it all full circle, but dang it, I want a dozen more Gamera movies. And while I'm not doing a ranking of every Gamera film, I'll say that The Brave is better than every Showa movie except vs. Giron and vs. Gyaus, which I'd put right here in a full series ranking. At 3, Gamera Guardian of the Universe. This is the platonic ideal of the classic kaiju movie, complete with government investigations, multiple characters with their own arcs tied to the central kaiju, escalating fights, great suitmation, fun effects, a wonderful central kaiju, and a very satisfying payoff. Here in the form of what is essentially a Wild West monster duel. This is fulfilling the promise of what Gamera could have been in the Showa era before going to even greater heights. At 2, Gamera 2 Attack of Legion. This thing honks. Peak kaiju storytelling. Kaneko really knows how to escalate his threats, fights, and world with a story about invasion, war, heroism, sacrifice, and unity in the face of overwhelming terror. Legion is a cross between an apocalypse and a hostile nation, literally breaking down modern Japan's innovations for its own gain, and only Gamera, in conjunction with a Japan deciding to fight for itself, can save the country. Really incredible fights, effects, and costumes. This feels like the peak of practical tokusatsu meeting with just enough digital effects for something really epic and insane. Proof that Heisei Gamera is on a different level. And at number 1, Gamera 3 Revenge of Iris. What I find most powerful about Gamera 3 is that Kaneko deliberately moves away from the extravagant kaiju battles that were the high points of 1 and 2, and instead pushes into a much more personal and terrifying perspective on kaiju destruction on a human level. Gamera's battles aren't heroic rescues, but world-ending cataclysms. The toll on a single soul is as devastating as a city on fire. And if anyone ever says that the human plots aren't important in a kaiju film, this is the ultimate example of that being a dumb take. The result is that Gamera 3 creates a much more complicated and morally gray outlook on Gamera and Iris, interrogating our human desires to place our emotions on beings far beyond our understanding. And while this results in a Gamera that is way scarier than anything that came before, and a star kaiju that's largely off-screen, it also asserts this film's belief that only love and compassion for each other can save the world. This is a deeply human and personal film that is also the grandest and most apocalyptic Gamera movie ever created, and one that rivals anything starring Godzilla. Is Gamera 3 the greatest kaiju film of all time? It's got stiff competition in Gamera 2, Shin Gojira, Ishiro Honda's original, Destoroyah, and Biollante. But it reaches a real emotional depth that's possible in the genre, but found by very few. With that, we've reached the end of Gamera's time defending Japan. But after nearly 20 years without any new stories, Gamera is set to finally make a comeback with Netflix's animated series, Gamera Rebirth. At the time of making this video, very little is known about the series, beyond that it will arrive in 2023 and pit the Guardian against 5 kaiju, 2 of which are likely Gyaus and Jiger. Will it connect to any previous films or be a fresh start? Where will Gamera go from here? In both his stories and behind-the-scenes history, it's been easy to count Gamera out for good, when the odds seem impossible to overcome. But if this trip through history has taught us anything, it's that Gamera will always return to save the day. Thanks for watching today's video and my second and final Gamera retrospective. I know this is a lot shorter than the Godzilla retrospective that I've done before, but there are really only 2 eras of Gamera, Showa and Heisei. And of course, once I did the Showa era video, I had to follow it up with the Heisei video, because the Heisei Gamera movies, as I've outlined here in this video, are truly incredible. I actually watched those Heisei movies before I ever watched any Showa Gamera, and they immediately made me a fan of the kaiju for life. And what I think Kaneko, Ito, Higuchi, and crew made with these 3 films, and of course Brave is good too, but not quite on the same level, are some of the greatest kaiju films ever made. They are really special, and I hope that watching this video encouraged you to watch these for the first time if you haven't, or check them out again if you have. There's an Arrow box set of them all, but they're also on Amazon Prime right now in the US. So they're really easy to get a hold of, and they look really great right now in these restorations. As I said, Gamera 3 Revenge of Iris is one of the greatest kaiju movies of all time, and I'd put it right up there with Shin Gojira or any of my favorite Godzilla movies, or any of the best kaiju movies overall. But Attack of Legion is also really incredible, and really scary too. For so long, Gamera was defined by the silliness of the Showa era, but I think in a lot of fans' minds, Heisei Gamera is the Gamera that comes to mind first when thinking about the character. Of course, silliness is great in kaiju movies too, and I don't think that kaiju movies have to be self-serious to be great, but I think that both have their own unique strengths, and they really need someone special behind the camera and writing the script to really pull it off. And I just don't think that most of the Showa era movies ever really quite pulled it off. But the Gamera trilogy is awesome. And like I said, Gamera the Brave is a fun throwback way to end the series, or at least end it for 20 years. And of course, at this time, Gamera Rebirth hasn't come out yet, but I'm really looking forward to it and I'm interested to see what they do. And I hope at least it's better than those terrible Netflix animated Godzilla movies that came out a few years ago, which were just so boring. Please don't make your kaiju movies boring. That's the worst thing that you can do. You can make them silly and stupid and bad, but just don't make them boring. Anyway, I'm interested to see what happens, and of course I'll be talking about those when the time is right. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Heisei Gamera and what your favorite Gamera movie is, and what you think the greatest kaiju movies of all time are. Gamera coverage is done on the channel for now, but kaiju movies will return. As always, a shout out to my patrons for their continued support. And if you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video and exclusive Patreon-only reviews. The latest Patreon-only review was a review of Terminator 2, which was voted on by my patrons. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and taking good care of any pet turtles that might come into your possession. You never know when they're gonna grow really big and save your life.